What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back, everyone. This is Lee, and yes, today we'll be talking about the Nikon Z9 versus the Nikon D850. And right before we get started, I know there's going to be two big parties down below in the comment section: the Z9 owners and the D850 owners. And let's put it this way: I'm going to say something that's going to trigger a group. You guys going to say something going to trigger another group, and it's the holiday season, so let's just be nice in the comment section. How about that? How about that? So the Nikon Z9 versus Nikon D850. The Nikon Z9 is 5,500 USD, and the Nikon D850 costs roughly 2,800. And also, one last thing, the D850 is still being produced as we speak today, unlike the D500, which is discontinued. So if you're looking for support in the DSLR world, definitely the D850 is the way to go because it's still being produced. So that's a good side for these Nikon D850 owners. So there we go. Anyways, if we look at the price difference, the price difference between these two cameras, it's 2,700 USD, and that's almost two D850s versus one Z9. So give or take, depending on your situation, there's your price tag. See what you guys can afford. There we go. Now, as usual, let's take a look at the weight between these two systems. The Z9 weighs about 1,340 grams, whereas the D850 weighs about 915 grams. Now for some quick specs, the Z9 is 45 megapixel. It can shoot up to 20 frames per second, up to 1,000 frames. It has 493 face detection points, and also it has the crazy amount of video capabilities. You got the 8K, you got the 4K, you got NRAW, everything's internal. You don't need external monitor. It's crazy. It's kind of wild, you think about it. And also, it was released roughly around 2021. I would say 2022 of January, because when it was released in 2021, I think that was like end of December. I don't know if that's cheating or not, but let's just put it out there. Okay. Let's move right along to the D850 now. The D850 is 45 megapixel, of course, 7 frames per second, up to 51 frames raw. However, you could pick up a battery grip, and that's going to cost you like, I think it's like $400. Yeah, I don't know if that's worth it, but then again, it might be for some of you guys that do long travels and just long assignments. So there we go, right? And this system right here has 4K, crazy enough, and it has full HD. So yeah, because this thing came around 2017, and wow, that's a long time ago, 2017. Now moving right along, let's take a look at the back of the system. Obviously, the DSLR has the OVF, the EVF is definitely the Nikon Z9's mirrorless, of course. And behind the screen is the 3.2 tilting touchscreen on the LCD D850. There's a 4X tilting screen on the touchscreen for the Nikon Z9. So you could do a lot of maneuvers around the Nikon Z9, but this one this is weird. Why does the D850 has a detailed screen than the Z9? It doesn't make sense to me. It kind of boggles my mind. I think it happened with the D500 as well, but some reason Nikon Z9, they downgraded the dots on the screen, and I went to the Nikon website to make sure I'm not seeing things, and here we go. Very interesting. I'm not crazy. I'm reading that right. That's from the Nikon website. So unless Nikon put the wrong info on their website, D850 has a much more higher resolution screen than the Z9. So there we go. Wow, the 2017 has some grit to it. Got some grit. But anyways, moving right along, the Nikon Z9 has your BSI. It also has the IBIS. The D850 don't have IBIS, which is kind of weird because if you look at the market back then, you have a Pentax K1 at 36 megapixel. It has IBIS, and Nikon didn't. So that always bothered me because I always want Nikon to be ahead of the tech, but they didn't. They never put IBIS in their DSLR. Pentax did. That's really weird, right? But anyways, this is XP7 versus XP5. So we are going to look at 2 generation gap differences between these two systems. So that'll be later on in the color test and also dynamic range test and also the ISO test. So yeah, there we go. Now as for the battery comparison versus the Nikon Z9 and D850, the Nikon Z9 has an integrated battery grid because it's the flagship, obviously, and it rocks the EL18D, not the EL15 as you see on the D850. The EL18D is 220 USD, whereas the EL15 is 70 USD. Now let's take a look at the shots per charge. Now, obviously, everyone knows this. We cannot trust this chart by Nikon, obviously, but in all honesty, the Z9 offers so many different photo modes, so it's really hard to compare. So in that case, I'll just say it's even. But definitely the Z9 seems to last pretty long as well, like the D850, which is the main reason why a lot of people like to stick with the DSLR, because the battery life is a lot longer. Now, in terms of card slot, the Nikon Z9 uses 2 CF Express slots, whereas the Nikon D850 uses 1 UHS and 1 CF Express or XQD. So there we go. Now, and speaking about card slots, let's take a look at the buffer. Now, we're using the same exact CF Express card on both cameras. You know my deal. And this is what the D850 sounds like. This is what the Nikon Z9 sounds like. Now here's both cameras on top of one another, and let's take a look at the audio peaks. And there we go. Definitely the Nikon Z9 is more advanced than the D850. The Z9 can just keep shooting and shooting and shooting. The D850 seems to stop towards the end. And also the Nikon D850 has the loud shutter clap. And the Nikon Z9 is completely silent, but I had to turn up the audio for you guys so you guys can see the audio peaks. And also the mechanical shutter is way too loud for wildlife currently in this day and age. And yeah, isn't that crazy? Back in the days, the D850 was actually, no, when the D850 came out, people were already complaining about the shutter clap. Anyways, I take that back. Now let's take a look at the color comparison. Here is the first test. I'm shooting outdoors on a cloudy day, and as you can already tell, I think that the Z9 is just a tad bit slightly saturated, a tad bit slightly exposed, I guess. I don't know. Let me know down below what you guys think. It's not a big difference. I don't think there is a big difference at all, unless you use the Nikon Z lens, which we're not using. We're using the exact same lens, just to see the sensor. And I'll be quite honest, I don't see any big difference, really. Now here's the second test, and my comments remains the same. I don't see a huge difference between either scenes. Once you put your file into Lightroom or whatever program you're using, you could just slightly adjust your colors. But currently right now, I think that the Z9 might be a tad brighter than the D50, but I don't see a big difference to complain about. I can't tell the difference if you gave me a blind test, but there we go, right? There we go. This is a XP5 versus XP7. Now here's the last test. Let's take a look. And already my comments still remains the same. I don't see a huge difference between either system. Maybe the Z9 might be slightly a tad saturated and brighter, maybe. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. Okay, I'll be quite honest. It looks identical to me. I think once you, like I said, once you put it in the raw in Lightroom and you do your adjustments, no one can tell, but it looks more or less the same, just a tad different on the Z9 maybe, but I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. I want to be as critical as I can, but for this color comparison, it looks more or less the same. So there we go, right? There we go. Now here is the ISO test. Here's the Nikon Z9 D850. Here's ISO 64. Here's ISO 100. Here's ISO 400, ISO 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800. Now as for the next test, this is my dynamic range test. This is where I underexpose my shot and I'll lift up the exposure in Lightroom. And here's the first test right here. As you can see, it seemed like the D850 is turning magenta, whereas the Z9 with the same exact settings, it does not. So that's the XP5 versus the XP7. So there we go. Here's the second test. I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm underexposing my shot and I'm pushing out in Lightroom. And this is what it looks like. And as you can clearly see, the saturation on the D850 seems to, it seems to like wash out a little bit. The Nikon Z9 seems to be a lot more saturated. This is in pure darkness, of course. And yeah, this is pretty interesting to see. Kind of loses its mojo versus the Z9. Look at the back, the trees in the back is turning magenta in the back on the D850. Not so good. But just keep in mind, this is for those folks that shoot in dark conditions. The Z9 will give you better dynamic range. Now, let's take a look at an indoor test. And as you can see, even with the indoor test, the Z9 is a lot better than a D850. Now, I know some folks are going to say, oh, I could just color correct to match the Z9, but the problem is if you don't know the actual color in the dark, how do you know what is the actual color? So that's the biggest argument right there. It's like if you went to a dark room and you don't know what is the actual color in the room, but you just took a picture in there, how do you know if you're actually adjusting to the right color? You don't, right? So just wrapping this up, the Nikon Z9 versus the D850. If you're on a budget, get the D850, right? There we go. Let's call it like it is. If you're on a budget, get the D850. Z9 is too expensive, but Z9 has all the bells and whistles you can ever think about. AK, NRAW, IBIS, eye tracking. You has the best dynamic range, XP7 obviously. You could put the F-mount lens onto your Z-mount camera. You could put a Sony E-mount lens onto your Z-mount camera. You could use your Canon EF mount on your Z-mount camera with autofocus. All this is with autofocus. And as for the Nikon D850, all I can say is there's nothing I can think of on the top of my head that's better than the Z9 on the Nikon Z9. There's nothing except the OVF and the resolution on the screen. And also maybe the budget, right? The pricing, and that's it. 3 things: price, OVF, and the resolution on the screen. And besides those 3, Z9 is more advanced than the D850. So with all that said, thank you guys for checking me back. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely click like and subscribe. And I guess I'll see you guys next one, all right? Take it easy. Peace.